Yo, what up? My name is Don, and today we're going to be getting into the story of how I, for the first time ever, bent the pins on my current AMD 3950X CPU and how I went about repairing it. So let's get right into it. So, how did we get here? Well, recently I've been having some computer crashes where my computer will just hard crash, complete black screen, no blue screen of death, no error messages. So I had initially thought it might have been power related. So I started looking at my power supply and also my graphics card because the screen would just go completely black and the computer doesn't try to restart itself. Nothing. I don't have to cut the power to the power supply via the switch on the power supply and restart it. I can just restart my computer and that's it. So I had thought that my Corsair RM850X power supply might have been the issue. This is a great power supply. It is 80 plus gold certified, but it's been working fantastically for me since I bought it. And I also thought that it might have been a issue with my old RTX 2070. But once I replaced them with an Asus 1200 watt power supply and a RTX 5070 Ti, which I have in the system right now, along with that CPU that I had bent the pins on, we are on that computer right now. The crashes kept happening, so I started looking towards the CPU. I hadn't replaced my thermal paste in a while, so I thought that that was a good place to start. So I found some spare thermal paste. I took off the old thermal paste, reapplied the old spare thermal paste, and watched my temperatures drop, but still I was getting crashes. So I ordered some new thermal paste that very same day. The next day that was, I believe, Sunday on the weekend, I had went to go apply the thermal paste and the CPU cooler wasn't coming off. I had to give it some, struggle with it a little bit, give it some shimmying, give it a little bit of coaxing, and it was not coming off. So I pulled a little harder, then all of a sudden it was like crunch, and everything came off. And I only knew that. I mean, the CPU cooler came off. It was in my hand. I looked down at my CPU socket, and the CPU was not in there, and my heart sank. And I went, uh-oh. And I looked at the CPU socket thinking I had broke something because for some reason on AM4 sockets, Asus and other manufacturers, I guess, I'm not sure if this is something to do with the socket, but I'm not sure why every other motherboard prior to this and after this, I'm talking to you, AM5, has metal CPU sockets, whereas AM4 has a plastic one. What's that about? So, anyways, to my detriment, somehow it failed without the latch coming undone, and my CPU came out with my CPU cooler. Oh dear. So I looked at my CPU cooler and my CPU and realized that I had actually bent some pins, which is a bummer. Now, I have never bent pins before, and I've never repaired bent pins before, and that's how we got here. So you can see I have my AMD 3950X in front of me here, and you can see the damaged pins on the right side making a little wave. They're really not that far bent in, so I didn't think repair was going to be too bad, but I also didn't know how fragile the pins were. So I'm just going to turn around the CPU, and you can see here from the front that I only managed to bend about 7 pins. I think about counting from the left, when you get to about the 8th pin, it straightens out. At this point, I started looking for tools to use to attempt to repair my CPU, and some of the suggestions that I came across were to use a credit card, a mechanical pencil, or even an X-Acto knife, but I found these all to be poor choices when it came to repairing the bent pins, as you'll come to see. The first tool that I tried to use was a credit card, but I found that this was a poor choice because it was just a little too thick to get in between the rows of pins, and I found that I needed something to get underneath the damaged pins and lift upwards to straighten them out because they were leaning into the next row of pins. The next tool I tried to use for repair was actually a mechanical pencil, which people recommend because the diameter of the hole where you insert the graphite sticks is about the same size as the pins on the CPU. The mechanical pencil that I was using was 0.7 millimeters, but I found this to be a bad choice because the way that the tip flares out on the end of the pencil is just a bit too wide to effectively use it on a damaged pin without impacting one of the neighboring pins. So I was not confident using this as well. The length of the mechanical pencil makes it really sketchy to use it to adjust something as small as the CPU pin without feeling like you're going to break it. You can see me struggling to get the tip of the mechanical pencil over any of the pins effectively, and because of this, my confidence level with this method was not high. Here's another angle showing me struggling to get the tip of the mechanical pencil over the pins on the CPU, and it may look like I'm using a lot of pressure to push down on the pins, but I can promise you I'm using the most delicate touch and featherlight pressure. It only looks this way because I'm filming on a 90mm macro lens. I've seen people use things like X-Acto knives to get the pins to bend straight and to be in line with the row that they're in, but that doesn't really give me the most confidence only because the X-Acto knife has a sharp edge, and I feel like scratching any part of the CPU is not a good idea. So I actually went and asked my girlfriend for a sewing needle, which I found was a great choice, being thin enough to travel between the lanes and also round so that it would make contact smoothly with any surface that it would come into contact with. This combined with another tool that I randomly found fit perfectly in between the lanes was actually my metal guitar measurement card, which is probably around 1 to 2 millimeters thick. And because it has blunted edges, not sharp edges, it was fantastic to put in between the lanes to make sure that the pins were in fact straight. In the case of this repair, I got lucky because my pins weren't too crooked. They were maybe leaning 70 degrees towards the lane next to them. But in the case of some CPUs that have pins that are quite bent over or flat or they look like curly fries, I think that I would still use the metal guitar card because it gives you a flat surface to bend the pins against. Whereas with something like the tweezer method, I find that you can often turn the pins into a bit of a fractured mess. And the more that you bend these pins, even though they will get stronger, as explained on the CPU repair video on Linus Tech Tips channel, there is a point where it will get brittle and the CPU pins will just crack off. So you do want to be careful of that. And I find that getting that pin, that sewing needle underneath them to just kind of lift them up seem to be the friendliest method and the least intrusive method. So you can see me being very careful here, trying to get the sewing needle underneath the pins and just lift up carefully and slowly just to kind of coax them back upwards into a 90-degree straight upwards position. I'm also being sure to check quite frequently in between bending the pins just to make sure that the diameter or the thickness of the sewing needle I'm using isn't impacting any pins adjacent, which did in fact happen when I was using the mechanical pencil and the credit card to try and adjust the pins. So you really do want to be careful what you're trying to stick in between these lanes or rows of pins. Once I got the damaged pins in a mostly upright position, I mostly used the metal guitar card to run between the lanes now and just get that last, 20, 15, 10 degrees of angle, just to make sure they were as close to 90 degree and as straight upwards as possible. So after about 10 to 15 minutes of working the pins back into an upright position, I was ready to compare my work to the opposite corner that somehow had remained undamaged when I ripped the CPU out of the CPU socket. So when looking at this corner of the CPU, we can tell that everything is nice and perfect as it should be. And if I just flip the CPU around to the corner that I damaged, we can also see that all the lanes are perfect. Everything's nice and straight. And this was a successful repair as I do have the CPU back in the computer and it's running perfectly. Although I will say this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I'm not sure if I'm so happy that AMD switched to a land grid array as opposed to a pin grid array, because I would say that if I did this again, it wouldn't be so bad to repair. And I've seen some of the pin repairs that people have done on AM5 boards where the pins are in the CPU socket, and that just looks like a nightmare. So I would happily do this again. So that brings us to the end. Obviously, I'm super happy that I was able to fix my CPU. Hopefully, this video helped some of you learn how you can go about fixing your CPU if you happen to bend the pins on the CPU somehow. I don't want to have to worry about doing this again, and since I'm upgrading to the AM5 platform soon, that will be a reality. Now I just have to worry about bending the pins on the CPU socket instead. Yippee! Anyhow, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.